Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Ryder from CrafterCMS. Welcome to our next session at CrafterCMS Live, accelerating content-oriented digital experience development across the enterprise. Megan is a product manager at Encoura, an educational services company that provides custom technology solutions that combine EduVenture's research, data science, strategic enrollment services, and multi-channel marketing to serve over 2,000 higher ed institutions. And Tony is a solution architect at Kingsway Digital, a certified solution partner of CrafterCMS. Throughout this presentation, we'll hit the end where there's a Q&A section where we welcome questions from the audience. So if you have any, please enter your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're watching this from the lobby, you'll need to join the session in order to ask questions. Megan and Tony, please go ahead and take it away.
Hi, thanks, Andy. So I just wanted to start out by giving a little introduction to myself, and Tony will introduce himself, and then we'll kind of dig into some of the topics. So my name is Megan. I have a background in chemistry. I spent 13 years in the education space overall. 8 of those have been in product. I've had all different kinds of roles over the years, from adjunct professor. I've been in customer support. I was also a training and implementation manager for a while before I finally landed in product. And I became a product manager because I found that I'm able to help students by building products for them in a way that I never could as an instructor. And I'm really passionate about helping students achieve their dreams through education. So that's me.
Thanks, Megan. Hi there. My name is Tony Field, and I'm super glad to be presenting here at Crafter Live with Megan and Encoura. I'm the Chief Solution Architect at the Kingsway Digital Company. We're a boutique consulting firm with decades of experience specializing in enterprise content management system deployments. We've worked with organizations ranging from Fortune 50 companies down to individual professionals. I love talking about CMS solutions and approaches, and so I'm really happy to be talking with you today. Thanks. Back to you, Megan.
Yeah, I want to give a little more context for Encoura and why we wanted to speak about the topics we're talking about today. So just a little bit more about Encoura. Like Andy noted, we're an education technology company. Our goal is to connect students with higher education institutions while serving as many of the folks involved in that process as we can. So that includes students and their families, K-12 educators like counselors and teachers, as well as the universities that are looking for students to fill their incoming classes who will be a great fit for their institutions. As such, there are a wide variety of products and services that we offer to support our users throughout the cycle of college and career planning, admissions, and enrollment. Today, we're going to focus specifically on kind of these 2 products as case studies because they more heavily use Crafter. So first, Encourage is a free college and career planning app for students. It's available in mobile and on web, and Encourage helps students with things like career exploration, finding a college that fits their interests, scholarships that they can apply to, and it also provides them with milestones and tasks that they should be working on accomplishing while they're in high school so that they have readiness for college. The other product, which also shares the name of our company, is Encoura. Encoura is an enrollment services management platform, and it connects colleges and universities to students and their families using machine learning and data science. Admissions offices use Encoura to help find the right students to recruit and fill their seats at their institutions based on things like academic success, location, interests, and more. There are also other things that Encoura does to serve those folks as well. So these 2 products were very well established in the organization prior to adopting Crafter at any kind of scale. They're very different products from each other. They have different user bases. They have different, patterns and UI experiences and all of that. And so, as such, they also, as you can imagine, have different dev teams. Each product has its own dev team, and those teams work in Agile and Scrum frameworks on these products. And then the CMS dev team sits at the center, providing experiences for those products. We serve Encourage and Encoura, as well as other content experiences like our company intranet. These two dev teams also have very different needs, and they need to be able to manage their own front ends for different reasons. Whoop. Sorry about that. So there is a on the Encourage side, they need really fine-tuned control over the experience, the front end, the design, in order to keep students engaged with the experience. And then on the Encoura side, they need to be able to own their front end because that product provides access to data. So anyone who has access to that product has data. And we take data privacy very, very seriously at our organization. And so one of the ways that we limit access to that is by limiting who can actually work on that product. So these are all the types of things that we needed to keep in mind as we decided to roll out a CMS. And so in introducing the CMS, we realized, we do have a need for having managed content experiences on the student planning app, for example. We needed to be able to provide them a library of content. We had some various weekly pieces of content that we would want to provide to students. So we're always like adding and changing the content. So we really did have a need for a CMS, but we needed to introduce it in an agile way so that introducing the CMS did not alter the practices and productivity that allows them to maintain control over that front end. So we started out with small headless features, developing kind of specific tools and custom components that support each of the team's product goals. So these were very customized experiences. So like I said, things like we have a college fun facts, for example, where students see 3 fun facts each week. And then on the Encoura side, the admissions platform side, we have a little news and announcements widget that we provide to them so that they can provide updates to users as they enter the home screen, and we update that on a monthly basis. So these are very customized experiences, like I said. The trade-off there was slower development on the CMS side because we were building these very bespoke UI features for each product. So once we became more established, we realized that we wanted to move towards providing a more scalable and standardized experience to make things easier both on ourselves and the other dev teams that we were supporting. And so what Tony's going to be walking you through now is some of the things we've been doing recently to try to move the business towards that more scaled and standardized experience, as well as some of the tools we provided to help the dev teams best leverage the CMS. And so, yeah, over to Tony.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks. So I'm going to go into some detail about our headless deployment architecture. I'll discuss some common tools and CMS-enabled component library that we built. I'll talk about how it integrates with Encoura's design system and the Storybook app, and then I'll wrap up with a novel approach to content modeling and documentation. But first, I want to start out by giving a very high-level summary of the deployment architecture that Encoura uses for the sites, including the sites that you saw Megan displaying a minute ago. Encoura currently has 6 sites in production on CrafterCMS. There's a mix of headless sites, hybrid sites, and server-rendered sites, as well as public sites and sites protected behind authentication. Encoura Cloud is the main site, the main platform site for Encoura. It is a client-side headless Next.js web application. Help Center is Encoura's support site. This is a Next.js application that has both React server components as well as client components. It supports secured content and personalization too. The Encourage for Students site is the main student site. It is a client-side headless Next.js application as well, and it also has a mobile app. Some of the content is retrieved through a federated Apollo GraphQL server, and some of it is retrieved directly from CrafterCMS. Our taxonomy site is a shared library site that exposes the organization's common taxonomy to all other projects. It serves content through REST, but it also has a free marker preview site that supports editing, and it ships with client site data sources and form controls to facilitate integration in Crafter with the taxonomy system. Next up is Encoura's intranet. It runs on CrafterCMS as well. It's a static React app that's hosted and served directly on CrafterCMS. So it is also secured and supports personalization. It's used every day and functions as a major source of information and knowledge for the organization. It also acts as a secure doc repository for certain types of content. And then finally, the digital site is basically just a static web server. Okay, so being a primarily headless deployment, Encoura's API usage follows the model of best tool for the job. It's a combination of stock Crafter REST services, including heavy use of OpenSearch, as well as selected custom Groovy-based REST services for those hard-to-reach places. Like many organizations, Encoura maintains 2 user repositories, public and internal, and these are used to authenticate the various web projects. Sites make use of token-based authentication handling, and it's custom built for one solution, and we use Crafter's single sign-on plugin for the other. So once Crafter has authenticated the user, the content is authorized using the authorized roles feature in Crafter, where content instances are flagged with a role. So like anonymous, authenticated, customer, or VIP, etc. Content access is then granted based on whether or not the visitor coming in has that corresponding role. Okay, so every site has its own distinct requirements, including rendering research reports, managing frequently asked questions, querying remote APIs for content extensions, and so on. But many of the requirements were almost exactly the same from one site to the next. Remember, as Megan pointed out, many of these sites already existed, or the projects that are responsible for them had been underway already, all with their own practices and processes. The CMS wasn't introduced at the beginning of these projects. It had to get introduced gradually. So the team wanted to dip its toe into the water before diving in with the CMS. In addition, the scope of CMS integration and architecture patterns that the integration would employ weren't known by the teams in advance, and there was no inclination to proactively develop a complete architecture before anything was needed for a specific feature. So it would have to be introduced gradually. This limited the scope of what could be deployed, and it meant having at most a direction and then taking very small steps in that direction with occasional side trips along the way. So while many of the needs seemed to be the same in retrospect, the common aspects coalesced over time, and the reality of the scope of the project became increasingly apparent. So how could this alignment of requirements be achieved in practice? What did we do? Well, one option was basically just to ignore it and let the uniqueness of each site be the dominating approach. This means everything is created bespoke. The business units would get exactly what they're asking for, and requirements would be very easy to discern. But that would obviously result in a lot of duplicated development and testing. In addition, it would add a lot of cognitive load onto the developers, who have to remember the specifics of each site and its own unique requirements. This solution would not scale well. We needed to find a way to standardize common elements in order to free up resources to address the actual unique elements of each site. So what were the common elements that we standardized? First, and most obviously, are content types. The most popular content types were practically the same across all sites, and when we pushed into the requirements a little bit, a few distinctions between them also fell away. We ended up with a common article type that we called flex content, as well as a standard image, a set of standard video types, a set of standard list types. When variations were needed, we were able to layer them in on top. Content types were actually rolled out in 2 ways, as individual copied content types and as plugins, and we'll get into more on that later. Second, design patterns came together, and 4 in particular of note. First, the page detail pattern. In this pattern, a component that's not an actual page can be rendered through a page whose job it is to render components of that type. So if, for example, we wanted to render an article, we would utilize a page that's basically an article renderer. This pattern allows us to render non-page enterprise content types as though they were pages. It is a content modeling technique that's designed to work well with the rendering constraints of pages and components in Crafter. Next was taxonomy integration. Multiple sites need enterprise content to be tagged with taxonomy fields. And so all of the enterprise content types tagged with taxonomy items are done in the exact same way. Third, experience builder usage also had to be standardized. Components that render experience builder do so really only in their detail view, as opposed to everywhere that content instance may get rendered on a site. This reduced unnecessary highlighting when in Studio's edit mode, and it simplified development. We also built React components to facilitate this. Finally, we are moving toward a standardized page routing system across all sites. For pages, it's not an issue because Crafter declares how pages should be routed, but for any enterprise content down in the component section of the repository, we need routing to work with the page detail pattern to ensure that we can figure out what the URL is of an enterprise content item so that the app can actually render it. This has been the trickiest to introduce, as the sites already have their own routing schemes in place. The last major component that we wanted to reuse were Crafter plugins. Anywhere we needed to customize the behavior of Crafter in more than one spot, a plugin was introduced. This led to the creation of half a dozen individual plugins, including apps, data sources, form controls, sidebar plugins, and other UI widgets. The plugin system provided a tidy way to abstract this functionality away from each site, but it also introduced a new problem: how to keep all of the sites in sync with the latest version of the plugin. So given this, let's now take a look at 2 specific artifacts that have served us well. We will start with the problem of the proliferating plugins. So once several sites had matured and expanded, we found ourselves copying these plugins around. Even though each plugin had its own repository, it meant a lot of work on the development side, building each one and deploying each plugin to each site, and then running a full regression cycle on each site of each plugin. This was a tracking nightmare, and we were wasting a lot of time with deployments. Our solution was to merge all of the custom widgets, data sources, and form controls into a single plugin, which lived in its own repository. We did this in 2 steps. First, merging all of them into a single repository, and then secondly, actually merging the widgets into a single plugin. Now, that single plugin will build every one of the widgets. They all have to be built on their own. Some of them are React apps that use Vite, some are simple JavaScript, some don't require a build at all. But once built, a script assembles all of the build artifacts into a directory structure that's compliant with Crafter's unified plugin directory structure. Voila, one single plugin. Initially, we used the Crafter CLI to deploy the plugin to each site, but some of our widgets could not be installed exclusively with the CLI. So we ended up writing our own script to install the plugin. But this was still a huge win. Finally, we had a single step build and deploy script for the common plugin widgets. So that simplified the building and deploying of the plugin onto a single site. But we still had to address deploying of the plugin to all of the sites. Remember, there are 6, and keeping the version number of those sites straight. We wrote a script that would copy the compiled plugin into all of the individual repositories, push them up to GitHub, and then create a pull request to merge the updated plugin into each site. Automating this felt like magic. So what are all these components that are so important that we had to automate this for? Well, the autofill data source, this is a full listing of all of our plugins. The autofill data source is a handy tool that copies values from one field into another if it hasn't already been populated. So this can, for example, be used to populate a short title field with the value from the full title field. This is used in several scenarios for articles and images and that kind of thing. The bulk import utility is an advanced application that securely handles bulk content updates. Suppose a third party has provided us with a list of edits for a large number of content items that are actively managed by the CMS. This happens once or twice a year with some of our content. We don't want to overwrite the entire item because they're actively managed, so we need to use custom logic to determine which fields need to be replaced by the incoming data. The bulk import utility can do that. Suppose we want to make a global update to a content type due to a content model change. We continue to iterate our content models. Changes are inevitable. A content importer can be written to do that. Suppose we want to write metadata from a remote REST service and add it as field data in our content instances. A custom job in the bulk importer can do that as well. Originally, this was a host page plugin, meaning that we had to write a React application to provide a whole user interface to do this. But it turns out that the requirements that we had for this were actually satisfied by the CMS tool itself. We were able to drop the React app entirely. We defined a content type representing an import job. That content type is initially populated with job data from the user. And when the importer's cron service runs and it finds an unprocessed job, it picks it up, flags it as in process, and then runs the job. It updates a field in the job content instance with log data and a status of the job so that content administrators can check in on the progress. The job also supports running in small batches too, keeping track of its progress over the minutes or hours it takes to run whatever the workload is that we're running. Most of our jobs run in a few seconds, but we have several that take, a little bit over an hour to run. This is a fantastic plugin that has replaced a number of different bulk operations in-house. And now the amount of boilerplate code that has to be written to write a new importer is very, very low. The Experience Builder sidebar plugin is a very simple plugin that adds a widget to the Experience Builder sidebar that allows authors to browse existing items using a friendly interface so that they don't have to open the left sidebar. This is a simplification of the Crafter Studio UI that has proven to be very helpful. So we deploy that in our common plugin. The component preview plugin is very important for us. It allows an author to navigate through folders in the left sidebar of Crafter and click on them to preview them. The normal behavior of clicking on a component is to open it in form view. But for enterprise content instances, the component preview plugin will leverage our standard routing pattern and page detail pattern, and instead open up the app in preview mode at the corresponding page detail for that content type, thereby allowing preview for enterprise content. This has proven to be a huge win for a number of reasons. Not only does it give a visual indication of what the content looks like in one of the contexts that renders it, but it also provides a way to edit it through Experience Builder. Items like articles that represent their body content as an array of items can very easily be edited in context this way. So you simply click on the article item in the sidebar and then click on the area of the content you want to edit in the preview window, and away you go. All of that was possible with pages, but because our enterprise content isn't a page, we need to write a plugin to make that work. Our taxonomy tools provide a data source, form controls, and supporting REST services that facilitate tagging content with taxonomy values from the taxonomy library site. We actually support several different form controls, including a multi-select field, a drop-down, a checkbox, search box, and more. Finally, one that ties all of this together is the version plugin. This simply provides a REST service that returns the current common plugin version number. Our developers and QA team members love this because it makes it very clear what version of the plugin is running on a given system. With a known version number deployed, our QA team can do deep functional testing of the plugin on one site, and then limit their testing on the other sites to more of a sanity check, saving time and headaches across the board. So the common plugin was an internal tool. What about developers from the other teams? How did we facilitate their experience? The next major artifact that we developed is the Encoura CMS React Toolkit, or CRT as we call it internally. The CRT's purpose is to standardize coding practices among the various teams when integrating with the CMS. Crafter is a very flexible system, and there are countless design patterns that can be used. We wanted to simplify using our patterns and reduce bugs that come through the use of less well-trodden code paths. We also needed to encourage the proper use of Experience Builder, as XB would be required to edit certain types of content and not just be a nice-to-have upgrade. So what is it? Well, it's a JavaScript SDK. It's available on Encoura's internal Nexus repository. It is a sample site and a set of instructional Confluence pages. We're currently using it on 3 sites now, and we have 2 more sites that are expected to use it. One is a new site, and the other one will likely be a retrofit. On the technical front, here's what it provides. The CMS context, which bootstraps the configuration of Crafter resources. It knows about backend hosts, how to acquire tokens, how to configure the Crafter client, and so on. Everything required to configure connectivity to Crafter is encapsulated in the CMS context. It also handles configuration of the Experience Builder components. We also included other Experience Builder support libraries. These libraries make it easier to interact with Experience Builder, including simplifying the use of render components and working with the content type map. One specific support component that's very important is the render article body component. This uses the library described above to provide a one-line tool to render an article body field. Not strictly necessary, but it greatly simplifies component development for the developers of the client apps who may not know the intricacies of working with Experience Builder. The CRT also includes a default implementation of the most common components in a neutrally styled manner. Encoura has its own design system in place, and it's used widely throughout the organization. And the CRT includes design system compliant components that render images, videos, text blocks, special notes, and other types of content to allow developers to focus on the development of the user experience, not the less interesting part of just rendering standard CMS content. These can be overridden, of course, and about half of them are. Finally, the CRT includes a simplified API to talk to the backend Crafter system, which allows developers to make a simple single call to request data from the backend without requiring them to manage host names, deal with cores, access an API tokens, wrangling the Crafter site variable, and all of that. So the CRT is not a site in a box. It's a CMS integration accelerator that reduces the time required to launch Experience Builder for CMS content. The CRT sample site is a simple demonstration site that allows that shows how to render content and how to configure the project to talk to Crafter. It can be browsed and content can be edited, which allows developers to get a really good sense as to how Experience Builder can work. The sample site has its own CMS repository and its own renderer, and it's also server-side Next.js. The toolkit also lives in its own repository. It's versioned and automatically deploys to Nexus after running through a series of tests and tasks. One of those tasks involves our documentation, in particular, Storybook and Chromatic. Most of the out-of-the-box components that ship with the CRT are documented in Storybook. This is a fantastic tool that allows developers to see the components in action and to see the code that drives them. Developers working with the CRT can look at their components in Storybook and determine if they meet their needs and decide whether they need to override the out-of-the-box components that we ship. Upon creation of a pull request into the CRT, it's constantly in development, we trigger Chromatic to run visual regression testing on our components through Storybook. If a commit to the repository results in a visual change to the component, we're prompted to approve that change before the pull request can be merged. The combination of these two tools has increased the robustness of the Encoura CMS React toolkit, allowing us to improve it without fear of breaking sites that are already using it. Besides Chromatic, the CRT also includes a set of wiki pages that describe how to use it in more detail. Only so much content can fit in its README file. We're really excited about the CRT and its potential to accelerate development across Encoura's sites. There have been a few bumps, and a few more remain on the road ahead, but we are committed to smoothing them out to continue reducing barriers to rolling out Experience Builder on the CMS. The last tool I want to talk about today is one that we built internally that has turned out to be a huge win for us. We call it the CMS modeling site. The CMS modeling site is basically a CMS site that provides detailed technical documentation about our content model. Yes, we literally describe our content model via a site powered by CrafterCMS. Each page on the site represents a content type, and each content type lists its metadata, sections, and attributes. You can drill in to look at attribute definitions, data sources, and custom form controls. It's been designed to be easy for non-technical people to read, but functional enough to provide quick access to complete technical specifications. We considered building this fully dynamically so that it could literally read the site configuration files from Crafter directly, but this would not achieve one of our most important goals, accelerating modeling. When we design a content type for the CMS, we start by knowing that we have a need for a particular kind of content type. We might know a few field names that we'll want to have, but we haven't really worked through the technical specs for each. But that's often enough to start conversations with designers and business owners. So the site allows Megan or one of our developers to define a content type and pick from existing attributes, or create a brand new attribute and add it to the content type. They can organize the attributes into sections, reorder them, and so on, just like you would when you're working with content in the Crafter UI, because that's how it's modeled. Once the rough designs are more or less together, we can then return to the roughed-in model and complete the rest of the technical specifications for the attributes and the rest of the content type. Once finalized, we mark it as complete and ready for consumption by publishing it. So we leverage Crafter's built-in publishing system. This also promotes the finalized versions of the content model to a site that's available for the other teams that are working with us, including authors and developers from the apps. You can see that with this approach, we're encouraged to reuse attributes, thereby reducing the total attribute count and the cognitive load on developers. We can also see that we're encouraged to use standard form controls or custom form controls that have already been built, rather than defining new ones every time we think we need one. So that sounds pretty nifty, but how's it actually used? Well, so this is a technical specification, obviously, for Crafter, for the CMS team's developers. It's documentation for business users, so that they can see what data is stored in each type and how to access it. And it's a technical reference guide for product developers, like the CMS team's clients, basically, so that they know what content types they're working with and how to access each individual bit of content, what the field names are, and so on. This site has been a really valuable tool for us and has solved one aspect of knowledge transfer that we need to be able to do to work with multiple teams on this, to work with multiple teams. Megan will now tell you more about our knowledge transfer and documentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So documentation as well as education and training is one of the first things I wanted to talk through regarding some of the challenges that we faced with implementing the technology and processes that Tony mentioned. So there's a a lot to go into when it comes to education, documentation, and training. So first up, we needed to find the right training, documentation, and support methods, both for our authoring teams and for the other developers that we work with. So we've done things like we have Confluence pages, we use the content model site, as Tony mentioned. We've done live training sessions, and we've had Q&A Slack channels. And the Q&A Slack channels, we've experimented and had discussions with other teams on, do we have one channel per team? Do we have one channel per project that we're working on with an individual team? We've also talked about the idea of having just one big Slack channel where anybody can ask questions from any part of the organization about Crafter and our CMS. And those conversations continue, and we try different things, and we see what kind of works. Right now, we kind of have a hybrid approach, where some teams we have projects and some teams we have a team Slack channel. In addition to those aspects, specifically for the CRT, the React Toolkit, that required additional education and training for the product teams, specifically the development teams, so that they knew how to apply the toolkit. So we needed to have meetings to introduce the toolkit, documentation, and providing best practices and examples. So we've done that through, like I said, Confluence pages and also the CRT sample site. We've created processes to help maximize the toolkit usefulness, and then also just answering questions from team members as they initially begin to use the toolkit. As new teams come on, or even just new members from the same teams, they ask a lot of questions. You'll find yourself answering the same question multiple times. And that's really where having good documentation comes into play. You want to be able to point people to a commonly asked questions type situation if you are being asked the same question multiple times. In addition to that aspect, I would say one of the biggest challenges we've had so far is coordinating and planning upgrades. It requires really tight coordination between the teams during our upgrades. So, for example, this past, we upgraded to 4.2.2. We on the CMS dev team couldn't upgrade and then leave the other two teams, the student app team and the admissions team, to stay on 405. We all had to upgrade together. The upgrades aren't super backwards compatible, so you have to be able to coordinate and make sure that you're sequencing things properly. If one team upgraded before another, there's a chance, if we didn't work through all the details, that we could actually break the front end for our end users, which is kind of the worst case scenario. So we had to make sure our sequencing was really careful with that to make sure that we were doing things in the correct order. Next, if teams need content to be custom, this is kind of not as much of a challenge, but just still something that we had to consider. We did have to figure out kind of on a case-by-case basis if a particular request is going to be standard enough to build into the toolkit, or if we're just building it for that particular team. And so that, like I said, that's kind of a case-by-case basis. We don't have a hard and fast rule. It's more just we look at the particular feature request, and if we think the other teams are going to be able to use it, then we add it to the toolkit itself. And if you decide to add something to the toolkit, you can't just, build it and plop it in. You've got to build it into the toolkit, roll it out to the other teams. You have to make sure that they know how to use that component properly, and then also provide support to them throughout the process of them developing it. If it turns out it's not exactly what they needed, or we missed some requirements, we have to work with them to iterate on what the feature is, and then make sure the other teams understand how it can be used as well. So that kind of goes back into the education, documentation, and training, and also coordinating and planning. So for all of these challenges, we did have some nice impacts. So we did look at reducing time to market by reducing the necessary training overall. After that initial hump of making sure everyone is on board and understands how to use the toolkit, it provides more consistency through processes and documentation and everything. So there's less time spent there. And also on our authoring side, for our authors, there's more consistent products for them to use for authoring purposes. And so it's more straightforward to get them onboarded as we add in new features. Another big impact has been reducing the amount of required testing. So I know Tony mentioned the common plugins, and so that's been great. The QA team can really thoroughly test in one section in one of the Crafter sites, and then instead of having to thoroughly test that feature across all the different Crafter sites, they can just validate to make sure that it's functioning properly and looks right on the others. Another aspect is we've been able to deliver features more consistently. There's more standard features that we're building, and the process is a little more consistent. So the teams kind of know a little bit more what to expect from the CMS dev team. And then finally, one of the best things from my perspective is being able to reuse features. You know, if we add a video player for one of the teams, they can go and use the video player. And then the next time a team in the company needs to have a video player, we don't have to basically reinvent the wheel working with them to create a new video player. They can go directly to the toolkit and grab that and go. So that definitely reduces the time that we spend developing things. And so throughout all of this information, I think what we see is we're an agile organization with very disparate teams with pre-established products. And we wanted to take advantage of CMS features and maintain the current development approaches. So we took an iterative CMS integration kind of approach using a handful of selected tools and design patterns to achieve some standardization and scale. As we look into the future, we are going to consolidate our bulk import tools. We have a couple of different means of bringing content into the CMS, and we're looking to make that just one thing. We're also looking to use a pattern to roll out a whole new app. We've talked about all the different products, and we went in pretty good detail on our student product and our admissions product. We also have an educator product that will have some content needs in the future. So we'll be looking to bring the toolkit and the other practices that Tony talked about into creating a content site for the educator product as well. And then last, just looking into toolkit iteration and collaboration. As Tony mentioned, the process isn't perfect. There's still some bumps and things to smooth out, and we want to make sure that we're working with our partner dev teams to smooth out those rough patches. And if there's any technologies and practices that we can improve upon, we want to make sure to do that so that the toolkit can continue to be something that's very useful and that it makes things efficient, not just for the CMS dev team, but also for our dev partners working on those products. And so that brings us to the end of our talk, but if there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Awesome, Tony and Megan. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'll go ahead and moderate the Q&A here. It looks like we have a question in the chat. I think this is mainly for Tony, but I can open it to everybody, or to Megan and Tony. Does each site have its own database schema?
So with Crafter, we're not necessarily using a database per se. The main repository is defined using content form definitions inside the CMS. So those are actually stored on in the Crafter repository as files. However, we do try to reuse the structure of those types as much as we can. So while the actual storage mechanism isn't a database, like what's actually returned and the way we interact with them, you can't really tell. So, yes, each site has its own distinct overall set of content types that it works with, but we try to reuse types whenever we can and whenever it's appropriate to do. And so that's where you see things like articles, images, videos, text blocks, that kind of thing being reused from one site to the next. We try to keep them standard, like without making any modifications to them, but that doesn't always work. Some sites will require additional fields to be added in, and so we'll add them. And the way our plugin system deploys them, whenever updates are made, we can do those updates without actually, damaging causing a problem with the existing content type definition that's there. If we do need to make a change to the content model to support, a change that is being used elsewhere, we would use our bulk import utility to facilitate that. And we actually had that happen just recently. We made a modification to the way our taxonomy data is stored, which was a huge change because that's used all over the place. And so we were able to run the bulk update utility to tweak the content types that needed to be updated to reflect that. So yeah, different schemas, but we try to reuse as much as we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. Looks like we have another question in the chat as well. And I think this is more geared towards Tony again. But could you talk a little bit more about the page detail pattern? Kind of why did you choose to model content as enterprise components instead of pages natively?
Sure. Yeah, so that's a really good question. So if you think about what a page is and what that means, a page is a piece of, we think of pages on the web as like there's a URL associated with it. We go to that URL and we get the content. But in the case of enterprise content, these are like your core corporate assets. You might want to use those assets in more than one location, more than one context. We're using articles on our news and announcements site, and we're also using those same articles in our library site, our content hub, and that kind of thing. So content will get used in multiple places. So what is the right URL for content that is used in more than one place? It's not in those cases, it's not about the URL. That's not the primary source of reference for that content. It's the content itself. That's the core asset. So in that sense, it's not a page. It would be a bit of an inappropriate modeling choice to define something as in a way that it's it isn't one of those things. So to get around that, to address that, not to get around it, like it's the core, it's deliberate, but in order to be able to render content that is in fact not a page, we need a pattern that will actually render it. So you've seen this pattern all over the place. You go to any kind of online store and you click on you're looking at a catalog with all of the products listed. You click on an individual product and it takes you to a page that lists the product specifications. And you might have some minor variations in the formatting and the fields of that product specification, but it's basically going through a common template that renders that component. That's the page detail pattern. So in that scenario, we have a page that renders like the core sort of site infrastructure around it. There's a URL associated with it. That URL is defined by the individual site. We try to standardize that too, but like the URL structure is defined by the site. But then we have some kind of a slug or identifier associated with the enterprise content that then allows the renderer to actually pull up that content and render it in line. So that's how it works and why we chose to go that way.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony, for that answer. The next question, I think this is more towards Megan. What are the authoring teams like for these products? And can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the authors are kind of folks who work internally throughout the organization. On the student app side, we have basically a content team that their experience is working with students in kind of the admission space. And so their goal is like content engagement. They're not on the technical side, I would say. They're a little bit less technical. So they need the content tools to be super easy and straightforward on their side. On the admissions, on the Encoura side, the authors, we have kind of a big group of different folks, actually. Some of the product managers are actually our users on that side, as well as the marketing team. So the marketing team is responsible for pulling together the like news and announcements content. We also have some folks that are on we have a team called Edge Adventures that does scholarly research. And so they manage a research library on that side. So there's a lot of different types of folks. They're all internal to the company, but yeah, a bunch of different kinds of users. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And then I guess more geared towards Tony again. I know that Mike just gave his keynote on AI, and a question about how do you see your processes evolving as AI becomes a bigger part of the tool set for designers and authors and developers? If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of exciting potential right now with AI, and we saw some great examples of it. A lot of what we built in this presentation or that we built and presented here is our tools that accelerate development that we've had to build on our own. To the extent that new content models can be defined using conversational approaches with AI plugged into Crafter, such that they understand our approaches, our models, and that kind of thing. That could really simplify things. There's a lot of opportunity on the DevOps side as well to improve efficiency in terms of how we manage. The fact that we've got a site like the dev content ops model that works really well with Crafter does have a lot of steps associated with it, and you want to be able to automate a lot of those things. And some of those steps need some very careful consideration when you take them. Like if you're merging into your environment, you need to make sure that merge is done well and that there are no glitches with it. And to the extent that the way those integrations are done is improved or facilitated with AI, those are also really interesting opportunities. I'm not even touching the generative content itself. Like that's a whole other realm. But in terms of like operationally, on the development side and on the DevOps side, those are some of the things that I think could be really helpful for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. And then I know we touched on your GraphQL a little bit, but Crafter has the built-in GraphQL support. Why did you choose to use Apollo GraphQL Federation?
Oh, sure. Well, so for one thing, it was a corporate standard. So Encoura leverages Apollo's Federation server extensively for the majority of the content that's the majority of the data that's being served by the system. And there are a lot of different content providers that are plugged into the Federation server. So we simply had to plug into that to be compliant with their architecture. And so there's an adapter that'll let you actually connect to Crafter. And it's not a Crafter specific adapter. They'll just let you connect to an external GraphQL server. And we did that for a while. And it worked pretty well. There were a couple of reasons we had to move away from it. One of them was the way the content models work with Crafter is the site information, the site name isn't part of the content model. So that means that if you have two sites that have a content type called article and they're not the same, that you get one GraphQL type that comes out into the server, and that was like a no-go for us. We had to work around having clashing content types in the Federation server, and that was kind of complicated. So that was a bit of an issue. And then the other one was once we upgraded a couple versions of the Federation server, we ran into some compatibility challenges on actually on getting that connector to work. So instead, what we did was we spun up our own GraphQL subgraph basically, and that natively plugs into the Apollo Federation server, and that's written in Nest.js. That's the platform we use for that, and the company has a standard like boilerplate like base repository for doing that, so it made it really easy for us to do. And then we were able to define the types however we wanted, and they just simply talk to Crafter using Crafter's stock APIs. So whether that was a REST API call or a search call or the SDK, we actually used all of those depending on what we were actually trying to do. There were some cases where we needed to run given that we were writing our own server, we're able to, or implementing our own kind of plugins into the Nest.js system. we were able to write custom Groovy scripts on the server side that did a bunch of pre-crunching basically to give us back the data in a super optimized format. So that was really cool. So we would, even though we had to write our own server on one hand, we got the benefit of actually being able to do server-side processing on the Crafter side. Crafter does have a lot. I want to be really clear. Crafter does have extensions and support that you can write to define your own types on Crafter and to do your own extensions. And we use those to a certain extent as well. But those other issues were kind of pushed us to do the standalone plugin.